What?
Okay. Oh. श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पाद शङ्करं लोकशङ्करं समस्तजनकल्याणे निरतं करुणामयं नमामि चिन्मयं देवं सद्गुरुं ब्रह्मविद्वरं मूकं करोति वाचालं पङ्गुं लङ्घयते गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे परमानन्दमाधवं परमानन्दमाधवम् नमः श्रीशङ्करानन्द गुरुपादाम्बुजन्मने सविलासमहामोह ग्राहग्रासैककर्मणि। So in the last few classes, we are seeing how the obstruction, what we call as an obstruction from us to gain the full vision of our true nature or the Brahman, we can call that way. And there seems to be some obstruction that is preventing us from knowing it fully. That is how the thought process is being developed by Swamiji here. And in order to understand that obstruction, he said that particular obstruction, he named it as avidya. Avidya, ignorance. Ignorance is the one which is there in our mind, which prevents us from knowing our true nature fully. Not that we don't know anything about it, because we do feel the joy aspect, the bliss aspect is available for us right from the Karana Shariram or causal body. And this particular bliss and Sat and Chit anyway are very much evident to us. That is what we have actually seen as the proof that is provided by Swamiji in this book in the first few verses. And in order to understand this obstruction, because we have to overcome that, the idea is that I am currently at a situation where my five senses operate in this world. My mind and intellect help me in gaining the knowledge associated with the world in terms of Shabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa, Gandha. The five senses, they come into my mind and I enjoy this particular world that is outside in terms of the creation. And I would like to now understand why when Swamiji's talk about mukti, where I am told there won't be any sorrow anymore. For doing that, I have to understand that my true nature is that of Brahman, because that is the permanent solution. You can have temporary solutions for gaining joy in this world, and that is where your desires work. And in order to improve upon that particular desires, what the Shastras, Gita, every text that we know tell us, you can improve your life with outside world. You can improve by improving the nature of your desires. That means, if suppose I am operating at a very basic animal kind of a joy, and I assume that that is the only joy that is available, Shastras do say, Vedas do say that by improving upon the nature of the desires from tamas to rajas, you will enjoy this world in a better way. But rajas is also an outward going mind that we develop, action oriented mind, and we tend to go outside with the, because I am used to already very low level of my desires associated with tamoguna, even my rajoguna associated desires are also can also be very low in nature. In the sense, I may be very actively pursuing the senses outside, but the sense objects are very crass in nature, very low level objects outside. So I may be going to bar, I may be going to dances, I may be going to mujra, and number of these ones you can think about, wherein you may be doing activity, but not necessarily good activity. So again, over a period of time, with the help of Vedas and Guru, you can improve that also. Means bring in certain sattva aspect into the same rajoguna, then being rajoguna dominant, but still sattva guna will be there behind in terms of those desires. In the sense that I then bring in the type of desires I improve upon, and I bring in Ishvara Sattva, immediately Ishvara comes into the picture. The moment Ishvara comes into my life, like Balvi has children's, they learn, yeah, Jab se pyara Ishvaraya, mera jeevan badal badal gaya. So the moment you bring in Ishwar into your mind, that is Sattva Guna into your mind, it is not possible for us to move to Sattva Guna completely, because the very nature, yeah, for thousands of years, I am in that particular way of thinking and operating in this world. Rajoguna still prevails, but my activities then will become more sattvic by nature. My desires will become more sattvic by nature. But remember, whether you are bound by a golden chain, whether you are bound by a copper chain, whether you are bound by an iron chain, the bondage remains same. The concept of bondage remains exactly the same. Only nature of my bondage differs. So it is good that I have a golden bondage rather than an iron bondage or copper bondage. How? Because this is easy to get rid of over a period of time, whereas my iron bondage, which is there, the iron chain, which is there, difficult to break. Whereas the gold is more softer material, easy to break. That is only just an example, yeah, that we are talking about. As long as your sattva guna prevails, it is much better. But the entire idea is that we require to break all types of bondages with outside world. And if I want to know that, I should be clear as to how in the first place, how is that I am bound by this iron chain? How come this is the current situation when Shastras are telling me my nature is that of Brahman? So in order to understand my individual experience with this world, vis-a-vis what Shastras are telling that I am that infinite Brahman, I need to break the current bondage with I am currently bound with this iron chain, and slowly move towards a bondage-less existence, which is referred to as Jivan Mukta. So in order to understand this, Swamiji is now proposing for us to understand this avidya also in a better way, because I require to overcome that. Yeah. So he has now, in order for us to understand, he has brought in a concept, what is called as Prakriti. Yeah. And this original Prakriti that is there, he says that it is divided into three gunas, which is Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. Now, this Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, they are not like silos in this particular Prakriti. It's not that 33% of it is Sattva, 33% is Rajas, 34% is Tamas. It's not like that. It's all mixed up. It is like a canvas and all these three paints are just painted one over the above, one over the other. So you have these three colors making up this infinite universe that is getting projected. And in order to understand the three entities that get created based on this, it says that if the Prakriti is Sattva Guna Pradhana, Shuddha Sattva Guna Pradhana, when pure Sattva is the main predominant component at that particular Prakriti, the reflection of the Brahman, and we have discussed last time with Abhimanyuji's question as to what this reflection is. Reflection is not really a reflection in terms of English term, but imagine that a sentiency is getting created in the inert aspect of Prakriti. Somehow it becomes sentient. Why? Because this Brahman has got that ability. Its very nature is that of Sat and Chit. The existence and being and knowing are inherent in Brahman, and that inherent quality somehow seems to be percolating into the inert world um, uh, just by being near to that. Yeah, that is what the term upadhi we have seen. When you define upadhi, staying close, somehow these mutually contradictory entities tend to or seemingly exchange their properties. That is what the definition of upadhi is all about. So my inert mind suddenly appears to be sentient and knowing mind. Yeah? Knowing and being becomes a very property of the mind, which is actually inert in by nature. Where it is coming from when rishis asked that question to themselves, they recognized that this is more like a Brahman's qualities somehow getting reflected in the inert mind and body. Now, reflection examples, that's why Gurudev gives that example. Even Shankaracharya gives this same example. So it is going on for many years together. It is like a pure crystal kept next to a blue cloth will appear to be blue by nature. It's not really reflection in terms of a light reflecting off the surface. Yeah, it is now the entire diamond or that particular crystal appears that of blue color. There is no doubt about that. It is completely taken over by the blue color, and that whiteness which is associated with that somehow is not seen at all. And in this particular case, that is how the reflection must be looked at, that these inert layers suddenly appears very sentient, and being and knowing become their inherent properties, appears to be inherent properties. And we said this particular Prakriti is divided into Sattva Guna, Rajoguna, and Tamoguna. And what we have seen is when such a reflection happens in that particular portion of the Prakriti, which is Shuddha Sattva Guna Pradhana, that is where Shuddha Sattva Guna means pure Sattva Guna. Doesn't mean 100%, but mostly 99.9% when it is Sattva Guna, little bit of Rajoguna, little bit of Tamoguna are inherent. Any Prakriti, these three must be there. That particular thing is we refer to as Maya. When the Prakriti is got pure Sattva Guna predominantly, it is called Maya, and the reflection which I mentioned will appear as Ishvara in this creation. And we have seen that Ishvara, because of that Sattva Guna Pradhana quality of the Prakriti, which is knowledge oriented, has a complete knowledge of himself, of Brahman, and entire thing that is going to be projected further. Everything he knows. So he becomes Sarvajnaha, Sarvashaktiman. These type of this ones are given to him, adjectives are given because the very cause is Sattva-guna pradhan. And we have seen when the avidya, that is what we are trying to understand, because I am not Ishvara as of now, although I have got the potential to become Ishvara. And for me to understand, I should more understand the avidya aspect, as I mentioned. So in this avidya aspect, he says, Malina Sattva Guna Pradhana is the, and when we say Malina, contamination, and contaminated with what? More of Rajas and Tamas. When Rajas aspect is much higher than the Sattva Guna, that is where the Prakriti itself is known as avidya. And when this avidya reflects that particular Brahman, which is inherent, yeah, all of Prakriti by nature, it has got this inherent capacity to reflect. Reflect again within the terminology and understanding what we have mentioned. So this avidya aspect is when that particular thing happens, the entity that gets created is the jiva. In fact, in some ways, whether it is Ishvara or whether we call this as jiva, all are jiva in one way. That is the reason why when we say aham brahmasmi or tattvamasi, tat tattvam asi, that tat and this tvam, they are one and the same. When we say like that, the jiva remains exactly the same, but jiva is known as Ishvara when your sattva guna is predominant and your rajoguna becomes very less in terms of proportion. But by nature, a jiva, rajoguna is the most prominent, where the further manifestation of the world takes place because of this rajoguna. And we have seen that because that particular consciousness, what I mentioned, the blue cloth on the spatikam, which is the where the diamond or crystal becomes or is seen to be blue. For example, when we say the consciousness sentiency aspect and the inert mind and body, they appear as one and the same. They are one and the same in the sense you cannot really separate them out in terms of your life. Very, very difficult for us to understand that. Only by logically, I can say that I can separate out by analyzing my three states. That is how we normally have done. That my waking state, my dream state, my deep sleep state, I can only analyze and say, okay, my body appears to be very, very sentient whenever I am awake. And when I'm sleeping, I don't know what's happening. But when I'm awake, it is very, very sentient. How will I remove sentiency from the body? And that I-ness which is associated with the body, we said, is only a yukti, only a kind of a mental adjustment I require to make, or knowledge I require to get, that this body in my dream state, the body is not there. I'm not aware of that body, and I start creating my own world in terms of dream, but the I-ness is still there. Means to say that consciousness and body are different from each other. This is only a intellectually a concept that I try to understand and separate them out. But really speaking, it's very difficult in your waking state to separate them out. And I mentioned an example of this symbolically in our temples we see Ardhanarishwara, that is part Shiva, part Parvati. So this is the Brahman and Prakriti. They remain 50-50, so to say, in terms of our experience. And that is represented by this Ardhanarishwara Tattva. Okay? And this because we are calling that as a reflection, one of the terms we use is Pratibimba Chaitanya. Bimba, original, Pratibimba, reflection. Reflection like one sees themselves in the mirror, like that reflection this entire thing seems to be there in my mind, that half of that Shiva seems to be an inseparable portion of my mind, which is Parvati. Yeah? But this inseparable nature is not only in Ishvara. Ishvara also has got the same this one. Yeah, Maya and Brahman together, they become the Ardhanarishvara, as I mentioned. And in terms of Jiva, that Avidya Tattvam which has come in also is supported by the same reflection of the Brahman. The blue cloth remains there. Only my crystals are different. When I talk about Ishvara, Ishvara becomes a huge samashti crystal, whereas individually I appear small crystal. Yeah? And this also we said, it is more because avidya is rajoguna pradhana. It somehow creates that avidya, Maya becomes avidya. So I am not able to recognize that true nature of Shiva who is coming into my mind and sitting there continuously. 100% of the time that Shiva Tattva is there in my mind, and this portion of I-ness associated with my causal body is referred to as Prajna, and Prajna thus becomes the Jiva, the first Jiva, the Jiva number one, we can take it that way. So this is where we have seen that there is a third portion which we refer to as Tamapradhana. Means the Prakriti now we have already seen where Sattva-guna Pradhana is the maximum, predominant, becomes Ishvara, where Rajoguna Pradhana Prakriti is more, we become Jiva or Prajna. And now we will be talking about a third aspect, which is called Prakriti. And this Prakriti is where Tamoguna Pradhana is the predominant aspect. Again, remember, when we say predominant, inherently there is Sattva-guna, Rajoguna even in the Jagat. And that is the reason why Jagat may appear completely inert, because it is Tamoguna Pradhana per se. But characteristics within that can be more sattvic in some cases, rajasic in some cases, tamasic in some cases. Means a rock, for example, becomes a completely immovable, inert appearance it will give in that manifestation. Whereas a water, for example, has got an ability to move. So Rajoguna Pradhana also seem to be displayed. And within the liquids also, some of them, within solids, for example, some of them are more a better quality solid items. Like for example, a diamond versus a rock, which is there. Diamond has got a different kind of a properties it is able to display. So that has got again a Sattva-guna, Rajoguna, Tamoguna, etc., etc. Yeah. So these three gunas you cannot avoid. But within that, we must understand this entire Jagat gets created with the Tamoguna Pradhana Prakriti. Yeah? And this is where we call that as Bhuta Srishti and Bhautika Srishti. We'll come to that after this particular verse number 18. We will see as to first things that get created as part of this Prakriti. So where Tamoguna is more, that is where he says that the Bhuta Srishti takes place. Bhuta is what? Tanmatras. We will read this verse and then explain this particular. Yeah. Tama Pradhana Prakrutesta Abhyogayoshvara Ishvarajnaya Tadbhogeshvarajnaya Viyat Pavana Tejombuhu Bhuvo Bhutani Jagnire. I'll read again. Tama Pradhana Prakrutesta Tadbhogeshvarajnaya Viyat Pavana Tejombuhu Bhuvo Bhutani Jagnire. So from Tama Pradhana Prakriti, Pradhana is predominantly, yeah? Tama Pradhana Prakriti, and it's also called, now the Sattva Pradhana Prakriti is called Maya, Rajo Pradhana Prakriti is called Avidya. Now Tama Pradhana Prakriti, there is no name given, but Swamiji describes this as the Prakriti itself. Yeah? So it's called Prakriti. So generally when we talk of Prakriti, we talk about this Prakriti in terms of Tama Pradhana Prakriti only. Because already I am a Jiva where Sat and Chit aspects are prevalent in me. I have no doubt about that. So I refer to the entire creation through the Prakriti aspect. Yeah. So the Tamapradhana Prakriti is called Prakriti, and this Tamapradhana comes from the Prakriti again at a bigger level. Anyway, hope it is not confusing. Now, out of this Tamapradhana Prakriti, Tad Bhogaya. Tad Bhogaya means what? A Jiva got created already, and for the this for the experience and enjoyment. Bhoga is enjoyment, and enjoyment in our parlance in Shastras is both. It can give you sadness, it can give you happiness. Both are bhoga. Yeah, means you are experiencing them irrespective of the final result. That will depend upon your prarabdha karma and other stuff. We will not go into all that right now. Yeah. So he says that Tama Pradhana Prakriti Tad Bhogaya Ishvaraha, from the Ishvara, for your enjoyment, for Jiva's enjoyment and experience, what he created? He created Bhutani Jagnire. Jagnire means birth, giving birth to Bhuta. Bhuta is the five Tanmatras which are there. And what are they? Viyat, Pavana, Tejo, Ambuhu, Bhuvaha. So these are the five words coming in the second line, if you see, and Viyat means space. So Viyat means space, and you have Pavana, very clear, wind. Pavana Putra Hanuman, we say Pavana is wind. Tejo is the fire. Ambuhu is water. Bhuvaha is earth. So he's telling that from the Prakriti, which is from the Tamoguna Pradhana Prakriti, which is also referred to as the Prakriti outside, the five elements got created, five bhutas got created. So this is the Bhuta Srishti which has taken place for the first this month. And why this got created? From the previous verse, we have seen that a Jiva, when he gets created at a causal body level, the individual is known as Pragya. Now for this Pragya to enjoy the world, these five elements got created to start. Okay. Again, when we talk about this Bhogaya, the term, actually every word that Vijayanji uses has got very, very deep meaning. Bhoga and enjoyment, we can call that, but sometimes Bhoga can also be something which you cannot avoid. So the very karma becomes your Bhoga. You don't have a choice but to go through that. So in that sense, the five elements that got created, they got created for the implementation of Ishvara as karma phala data. So your karma phalas that are there, from birth to birth that are there, you, depending upon the specific prarabdha karma that you have brought into this particular life, you need to go through, whether it is good or bad, the circumstances that get created into which you are thrown into is what the prarabdha karma is all about. And those circumstances require these five elements to be present, and the variations associated with these five elements backed by sattva, rajas, and tamogunas. Yeah, very, very important, because entire universe, if you see, all universe is made up of these five elements only. So the Prakriti, when we call, it is called, uh, the Kriti we said is to do, Prakriti is to do infinite varieties. So this Prakriti, that is infinite varieties of world and universe that we enjoy. I'm using the same word of enjoyment as bhoga. You will see that all of them will have these 5 elements in different proportions, backed by the 3 gunas, as I mentioned. Yeah? So these 5 elements of Akasha, Vayu, Agni, Apaha, and Prithvi, that is the space, wind, fire, water, and earth. These 5 elements at a very subtle level called tanmatras are the ones which get created in the very first wave of the universe that we see and call as Prakriti. Yeah? What we are seeing here in this particular text is slightly different terminology being used again. And so that you don't get confused, whenever such thing happens, I am flagging those differences between this and the other text that we have seen before. So here, normally what we say, Ishvara is the nimitta karana as well as upadana karana. These two terms I am sure we have heard many times before. Nimitta karana is the intelligent cause, and upadana karana is the material cause. We have seen this many times, that these two terms we have both are Ishvara. This is how normally we see the text. In this, slight difference is there, in the sense Ishvara becomes the nimitta karana here. He becomes the intelligent cause which gets reflected into this Prakriti, and Prakriti in turn becomes the upadana karana. Is there any major difference? No, because this Prakriti is only a how to put that, a concept that is introduced by Swami Vidyaranyaji in this particular text for us to gain the knowledge that that particular Brahman who gets reflected in this Prakriti, so-called Prakriti of Sattva, Rajas and Tamas, is not really having any direct action associated with this creation. So in order for separating that out, we are being given this extra thing called Prakriti, and this Prakriti in turn becomes the Upadana karana. But when we go back, the entire Prakriti, along with all that it manifests, it projects, everything will become a Mithya Vastu, depending fully on the Brahman for their very existence. So Prakriti cannot exist without Ishvara, Brahman. And what we are trying to tell is that this extra concept of Prakriti that is introduced becomes the Upadana Karanam in this particular text. Okay, don't get confused. It is exactly the same like others. Only a slightly different picture is being painted by Vidyaranji to describe this inert world or Mithya Prapancha as such. Now, these tanmatras we talk about, they are created in a sequential way. So he says that Akasha Vayuhu, but it is like this, that Akasha gets created first, and from Akasha, Vayu gets manifest. And from Vayu, the Agni gets manifest. And from Agni, the water or Ambuja, that gets manifested. And from Ambuja, the earth gets manifested. It is as if the very subtle aspect of this particular universe where it started, gradually it is becoming thicker and thicker. So one of the other, when it is coming, the earth obviously is the last one to get created, is the thickest of all, grossest of all. A little bit higher, lesser dense will be water. Little bit lesser dense is fire. Little bit less is Vayu. And very little, this one is space. So one actually can see very close relationship existing between the Brahman or Ishvara, you can call any one of that, with space. So there are Visishta Advaita, for example, they consider space as Ishvara. They say, why not? Because the definitions, whatever the Vedas are giving, they are telling you that this particular thing is infinite, space is infinite as far as I see. Whatever the powerful microscopes you create, you can only see up to a particular level. In fact, they have already said there is a limitation in terms of our observable universe sitting on this earth, because the light, when it travels, I cannot go beyond that. So there can be anything beyond that particular observable universe, even as per the science, but there is no way, even with the best instrument that I can create, I cannot see beyond a point. So it becomes infinite. Space is not affected by any changes. All the other four elements may change, but space doesn't get impacted. You can have a bomb blast at particular place, but really the blast may change everything in terms of earth. It can shatter, water it can evaporate, it can create fire. The air around can become hot and it can change. All changes may be there, but space somehow seems to be away from these four elements, so to say. So space appears to be Ishvara, and that's the reason some of the philosophies have treated space as Sat, that is the existence aspect, which gives the other four elements get superimposed in this space, is what Visishta Advaita is normally tells. Yeah, even Nyaya philosophy to some extent, they also, even Buddhism, for example, the Shunyavada that call about, they actually talk about this. But what they don't take into consideration, the same Vedas are telling that Akasha is a created entity, Sat is beyond. Yeah. Anyway, one important thing that we are talking about now is they are created one from the other. So the Akasha, you can actually make a small table. Yeah. So the first five elements, you can note it down as space, air, water, fire, and earth. In the second column, you can say the sense perception that is there, the property, unique property that is associated with these five elements are Shabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa, Gandha. So Akasha will have a property which is called sound. Yeah? And that is one of the reasons why Vedanta doesn't accept Akasha as Ishvara, because Ishvara doesn't have any characteristics or any adjectives that can be associated with that. However, Akasha has got a property which we refer to as the sound, Shabda, so it cannot be Sat, is one of the reasons given. Yeah. Vayu is Sparsha. Sparsha is touch. Yeah, you can see the sparsha of the when a cold wind breeze comes through, you can feel that sparsha aspect, which is over and above the sound aspect that is inbuilt into this. Means what? A element that gets created from something will have one unique characteristic of its own, but it will also carry the characteristic of the previous, from the effect from the cause which is there. That cause, the property of the cause also is inherent in the effect. Means what we are seeing here is karya karana viveka. Means normally when we go from our current experience, we want to shatter all these differences I see. I take this as Karya Karana Viveka. So here Swamiji is giving us what is this Karya and what is the Karana. Karana is cause, Karya is the effect. So Akasha becomes the Karana, Vayu becomes the Karya. A Karya will have the properties of both Karana and Karya. So here Vayu will have a Sparsha. It will also carry the shabda from the Akash, sound from Akash. So touch and sound becomes characteristics of Vayu. Jala, water, the unique property is taste. And it automatically carries both Shabda and Sparsha from the previous. The Karana of the elements, characteristic of the Karana elements is inbuilt in water, in the water. So in water, you see a sound, you see a touch, and you also see a taste associated with it. And the third one is Agni. Agni is where the form is there. It will have Shabda and Shabda and Sparsha from the previous one, and Agni will have a form associated with that as well. And water will have Shabda, Sparsha, and Rupa as well as Rasa. These are the ones which will be there associated with that. And Prithvi will have all of the four, that is Shabda, Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa from the previous elements, and also it will have an additional characteristic called smell or Gandha. So you see that this particular way, why we say that fire has come out of Akash, because it has got two properties associated with that. It doesn't have a form, it doesn't have taste, it doesn't have smell, but it has got Shabda and Sparsha that becomes the wind. Yeah, why? So it's like this. So what we are seeing here is the Bhuta Srishti, that the 5 elements that got created. And next we will be seeing that creation then takes the form of Bhautika Srishti. So Bhautika Srishti means the gross world that is experienced by everyone, every jiva will now be talked about. And this Bhautika Srishti is broadly divided into 2 aspects. One is called Sukshma Srishti, other is called Stula Srishti. Stula, gross. Sukshma, subtle. So the Bhuta Srishti, 5 elements got created. Now we will be looking at Bhautika Srishti, and this Bhautika Srishti has got a subtle world and a gross world associated with this. So verse 19 onwards, we will see the Bhautika Srishti being described. And we will be starting with the Sukshma Srishti. Yeah. Sattvam Shaihi Panchabhistesham Kramadhidindriya Panchakam Stotratvad Akshirasana Granakhyamupajayate. So verse 19, again I will read. Sattvam Shaihi Panchabhistesham Kramadhindriya Panchakam Shrotratvad Akshirasana Granakhyamupajayate. Again, like Jagnire, another word is here which is called Upajayate. Ja is born. Yeah, Upajayate, together they are born. That is how the Upajayate word is used here. What are they? These 5 organs of knowledge, like what we call Jnanendriya. The 5 Indriyas are getting created. What are these Indriyas? They are referred to as Dhi Indriya. In the first line, if you see the second, Kramadhi Indriya Panchakam. Dhi Indriya Panchakam. Dhi means intelligence. The intellect aspect which is there is Dhi. So the Indriya Panchakam that is associated with intellect is the 5 organs of knowledge that are there. That is what we are really Indriyas related to the knowledge gets created. Now, where from they are getting created? He says Sattvamshav, Panchabhis Tesham. So this 5 elements which got created first. Yeah. So we have Akasha, Vayu, Agni, Apaha, Prithvi. From this, the Sattva Amsha out of these, they actually create the 5 organs of knowledge. Now, question will come, but whole thing is, we said, has come out of Tamoguna as such, because Prakriti itself is Tamoguna. Where from this Sattvamsha is coming? That is the reason why we say that it is only Tamoguna Pradhana. Means there is a Sattva Amsha for all the 5 elements, and there is a Rajoguna with all the 5 elements, but basically they are inert by nature, and anything that's created out of these 5 is inert by nature, but there is a Sattva Guna Pradhana within this aspect of Tamoguna overall. So out of these 5 elements of Sattva Guna, of the 5 elements, these 5 are getting created. What are they getting created? 5 organs. I hope we all know. Shrotram. Shrotram is hearing. Tvak. Tvak is touch, which is there. Yeah. Akshi. Akshi is eyes. Yeah. Eyes is called Akshi, seeing. Rasana, taste. And Grana is the smell. So obviously, when we have already seen that from Akasha is sound, so from the Shabda is the property. So the type of organ that I have for hearing, that particular subtle aspect is referred to as the Shrotram. Shrotram is not sound. It is our ability built into the mind for hearing the sound. I also have a physical ear that is given here, and normally that is referred to as Golakam. Golakam is the instrument that is provided physically for you to use this ability to hear. And this ability to hear is the Indriyam that we talk about, or organ of knowledge. So this particular thing is at a very subtle level. This ability is built in, because what we are hearing is that the Ishvara created this entire prapancha for jivas to enjoy their bhoga. So unless the jiva gets that ability to use that particular instrument, or and know the object that got created for my bhoga, it makes no sense. Yeah? But still, depending upon your prarabdha karma, maybe some people are born blind, some people are born deaf, some people are born mute. So there can be 1 or 2 sense organs less. But that is very specific to a particular birth, and not necessarily every birth you will have the same this one. Yeah? You are going through a particular karma, and that is the reason why a couple of them may not be there, but your ability to see is there, ability to hear is there. How do we know? That a particular person who is born blind with the same karma can have an operation done and suddenly he starts seeing. Means what? I have that ability to see already. Physically, there was a deficiency, and temporarily my eyes are not able to see. But the moment that temporary deficiency is rectified, a person will be able to see. Similarly, I'm not able to hear, an instrument is provided, I start hearing that particular this one. There are some of these very touching videos are there available on the YouTube, small child hearing the sound of the mother for the first time, because born deaf, but there is some operation done or an instrument provided, and the child starts hearing, and the reaction is very touching. Yeah? So the Rishi is differentiated that your ability to hear and your actual hearing, there can be a karmic interference, but as a jiva, all the 5 sense organs coming from the sattva aspect of the 5 elements is there. So Shrotram comes from Akasha, the sattva aspect of the Akasha. Tvag or Tvak, the touch aspect, comes from the Vayu. Akshi, Akshi means the ability to see the form and light that we are talking about is coming from the fire. Rasana, or your ability to taste, comes from water, sattva guna of the water, and grana, your ability to smell, comes from the sattva guna element of tanmatra of the earth. So these five are born, and these five then become part of your Sukshma Srushti. This is all Bhautika Srushti, it is called, because these, although they are subtle by nature, they are all available at a Bhautika level, at an experiential level for the Jiva. So the Bhautika Srushti can be Sukshma or Stula. Stula is gross. Okay? So here we are seeing that the five elements, the Sattva Guna of the five elements is giving the ability of the five organs of knowledge available for the Jiva to enjoy the world that is created by the same elements. We will see how the others are getting created, but this particular thing is also part of that Srushti, overall Srushti that comes from the Prakriti element of the Prakriti. Okay. What we are seeing here is that there is a Karana, as I mentioned, and there is a Karya. Karya Karana. So the first thing is that there is a Sat, or the aspect of Prakriti, where the reflection of the Brahman or Ishvara is coming into picture, and five Tanmatras or Bhutas are getting created with specific properties inbuilt in them. Shabda Sparsha Rupa Rasa Gandha is there, and from the same elements, the Sattva aspect of the same elements, you are getting ability to make use of them or sense them. So when Akasha is created, it has got Shabda in that. So it is also creating an ability in your mind as the sense organ of knowledge for you to enjoy that sound aspect of the Akasha. So similarly, all that. Yeah. So another thing we have seen is that the cause always pervades the effect. Means if the Akasha is the cause for Vayu to get created, Akasha pervades Vayu. Akasha goes much above and over the Vayu, but it pervades the Vayu. Similarly, when Vayu is creating, it becomes the Karana for subsequent fire, for example, then Vayu kind of pervades the Vayu, including its individual function that gets reflected in the subsequent creation. So cause always pervades the effect is another thing we are seeing. Yeah? And as I mentioned, these organs of knowledge in this text are referred to as Dhi. Dhi means intellect. Yeah. So from the intellect aspect, you see that hearing, touch, seeing, taste, and smell becomes inherent powers available for that particular jiva at a very subtle level, at a mental level, mind level. You can take it that. Yeah. And they are different from the physical organs. Yeah. These are referred to as bodhakas. For example, we have ears for hearing sound and taking it inside. We have nose for smelling, tongue for tasting, eyes for seeing, skin for touching, etc., etc. Yeah. So all that is which is there already. Now, what we have seen here is the individual results of the tanmatras. Using the Sattva-guna, we have seen that they produce the five organs of knowledge. What they say is these five elements have got unique ability, and also they have got an ability to create together. You see that in the creation, when you see, for example, earth, when you take, earth has got inbuilt water is there, fire is there inside, means heat is there inside, and Vayu is there, space anyway is there. They're all pervading one after the other. The cause is pervading the effect anyway. When something gets created from individual elements, it is referred to as the um, uh, as a asadharana karya. That is the unique effect. Unique effect of Akasha is Shabda. Shabda becomes Shrotram, that means the ability to hear, is Asadharana Karya. It is called Asadharana Karya, means unique way of generating. Whereas all Sattva Guna of all the 5 elements put together can create something as well. So that is called Sadharana Karya, a generic effect which is there. Please remain with me. In the next verse, when we read, we will see what we mean by that. Yeah. So Sadharana Karya and Asadharana Karya. Sadharana is generic effect. All Sattva Gunas are 5 elements. He says that also creates something which is in verse 20, we will see. Right? Tairantakaranam sarvaihi vrittibedhena tadvidha mano vimarsha rupam syat buddhisya nischayatmika. Tairantakaranam sarvaihi vrittibedhena tadvidha mano vimarsha rupam syat buddhisyat nischayatmika. So here he says all the 5 elements together means Sattva Guna Taihi through Sarvaihi. Sarvaihi, all the 5 elements put together, when we see the Sattva Guna is creating, he says, is Antakaranam. Antakaranam is the inner instrument which gets created with the Sattva Guna of all the 5 elements combined together. Unique, we have already seen. It creates individually, it creates Shabda Sparsha Rupa Rasa Gandha, and ability to enjoy them is the organs of knowledge. But together, it creates what is referred to as Antakaranam. And this Antakaranam, he says, is divided into 2 depending upon the nature of that particular aspect. In what? Vimarsha Rupam. Vimarsha Rupam is doubting nature. That creates the mind, and Nischayatmika. When it becomes decisive by its nature, by same inner instrument, it is called as the intellect. So the mind and intellect, they are created with a generic, all the elements Sattva Guna put together, actually they create the mind and the intellect. So this becomes the, as I mentioned in the previous one, this becomes the generic effect of the all the 5 this one's put together. Yeah, Sadharana Karya. Karya is the effect. Yeah, Sadharana Karya and Asadharana Karya unique. Unique by each element create the ability to hear and all the 5 sense organs, and together the same Sattva Amsha of all the 5 elements is creating the mind, which is split into mind and intellect depending on whether it is Vimarshatmaka or Nischayatmika. Nischayatmika is what we mentioned, is decisive nature becomes intellect, and slightly vacillating nature becomes the mind. We will take it up again in the next class. We'll start with this verse 20 once again. Yeah, we are at the stop of this. So I will close the class. Those people who are busy can move on. Others, if they have any questions, I can take them after this. Yeah. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadhaya Purnamevavasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Swami Advayananda from CIF, he says to understand this particular portion of the text, it always helps if you start noting down in the form of a tabular form. Yeah, so you can have a Prakriti divided into 3 gunas, and then you have from Sattva Guna, Ishvara gets created, from Rajo Guna, Jiva gets created, and again Maya, Avidya, Prakriti. Even Prakriti has got Sattva Guna, and from Sattva Guna, from the generic effect, mind and intellect gets created. From unique effects, Asadharana Karya, the 5 sense organs gets created. So if you put that in a tabular form and start building on that verse after verse, makes it easy by end of that particular segment, yeah, that we will be looking at. It will help. Okay. Any questions anybody has got on today's?
I found it very difficult to comprehend everything. I know you have to do more reading to understand.
Correct, yeah.
But I don't know if I got you correctly, but you talked about the 5 elements, the 5 indriyas, that they're also in individual, are they in different proportions? The 5 indriyas.
They are not in different proportions. Yeah, this particular indriyas that they created, they are created from sattva guna of the 5 elements individually. So Akasha sattva guna creates your ability to hear, because Akasha's property is sound. So Shrotram is the term that is used here. So your ability to hear is the Jnanendriya, the term that you must have heard many times. The Jnanendriyas are 5. Yeah. So the Sattva Guna of Akasha is creating that ability for you to hear, which becomes a Jnanendriya called Shrotra. Similarly, Sattva Guna of wind becomes your ability to touch. The feeling of touch that you have, that ability is given as Jnanendriya at a very subtle level by pure Sattva Guna of the wind element. Similarly, for fire becomes a form or the ability to see, Akshi they call that. And water will give you the taste, ability to taste. And earth will give you the ability to smell. So these 5 in turn become the very Jnanendriyas they are called. They are not really what we refer to as the hearing, seeing. That is the physical aspect that is happening. But your very ability to gain that knowledge is Indriya. And that is coming from individual Sattva Guna of the 5 elements. Together, it is called as the mind and intellect get created, where all the 5 elements are there. Sattva Guna of all the 5 elements, which is called Sadharana Karya, that Sadharana effect is mind and intellect. So this individual creations become part of your mind and intellect.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
Shankarji, is there a tabulation done before anywhere?
Of course, it is done, but the expectation is that you individually attempt, and if required, please share with me. I can, if you don't want to share it in the general, this one, you can share individually with me. I can come back and correct the understanding if required, but mostly these, I think we are all aware, but it's expected that you do it individually to start with. Yeah. At the end of it, yeah, we can have an exercise and I can then share with you what I have done and send it to Swami Advayananda during the class at that time. Yeah, yeah, they are available.
Shankarji, my question is that this analysis or this description of the creation of human being is perhaps for the perfect person. Where does the karmas come into play or our vasanas come to play that makes us not so perfect?
Okay. So we will wait for this particular question for a couple of classes, Mohiniji. Hold back.
Okay.
Once we complete, say, the effects of Rajoguna, the effect of Tamoguna, and complete the aspects of creation itself, we will discuss definitely these individuality, how that is getting created in each one of us. Hold back, please.
Okay. It makes understanding little bit easier, but the bhavana, the emotional, the devotion bhavana seems getting on the background here. So
Correct, because Swami Vidyaranya is a very, he is not emotional. He is very clear in terms of what you must understand for you to break that avidya through sadhana. He will come to that when we go through, let us say, Sravana Manana Nididhyasana. When that sadhanas come into picture, that is when all this will come into picture. See, Mohiniji, it's like this, yeah. By nature, we are curious. By nature, we don't accept things just like that because somebody else has told. We want everything to be crystal clear in terms of this. It can be this, it can be that. That thing won't work, especially for an inquisitive mind, which is a prerequisite for people on Jnana Marga. This is Jnana Marga that we are talking about. We are not talking about Bhakti Marga. If you are talking of Bhakti Marga, we will stop this class and take Narada Bhakti Sutras. There you will not find any of this.
oh,
It is all Bhakti. So here we are on Jnana Marga. There is no emotion. He is very strict in terms of what and how everything got created. And best part is, after telling all this, how they are very strict in terms of that, he will say all this is mithya. Everything is negated and brushed aside. But for us to understand my current nature, where I'm starting my journey, he doesn't want any doubt in my mind. I start with a very clear understanding of how I got created and how I can overcome. And once I start overcoming, I myself see the fallacy of all this. And I'll say, oh, okay. This is only for my purpose, he is telling, not for the other way around.
okay. Thank you.
Most welcome. If no other question, then I think I'll stop the recording and we'll close the class. Yeah.
Hari Om. Thank you.
Hari Om. Thank you.